All right, continuing on page 14. Important pharmacy acts. Medication quality and safety have been a public and governmental concern for a very long time. The following sections will review the history of the significant legislation relating to the practice of pharmacy. A timeline is going to be used to summarize the important pharmacy laws, and that is included at the end of this chapter. So the first act we're going to review is the Pure, P-U-R-E, Food and Drug Act of 1906. This is also known as the Wiley Act. Wiley is W-I-L-E-Y. The Pure Food and Drug Act was the first legislation in the United States that offered protection to consumers from drug misuse. Pressure on President Roosevelt to improve the safety of food and drugs had been building for years, but it got a final boost with the release of The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, which exposed the horrific conditions in the meatpacking industry. On June 30th of 1906, President Roosevelt signed the Pure Food and Drug Act, which is otherwise known as the Wiley Act. This established both a meat inspection law and a comprehensive food and drug law. The basis of this law with regard to medications was to mandate accurate product labeling and to require that the ingredients used in the drugs met the standards of strength and quality, purity, right? So strength, quality, and purity within the United States Pharmacopoeia, the USP, and the National Formulary, NF. The law required that the food or drug label could not be false or misleading, and the presence and amount of 11 dangerous ingredients, including alcohol, heroin, cocaine, for example, those would have to be listed. The law required that no adulterated or misbranded drugs could be sent through interstate commerce, and the next act, which specifically discusses adulteration and misbranding, is going to be the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. So in 1937, diethylene glycol was used as a solvent for an elixir preparation of sulfanilamide, which is an older sulfonamide antibiotic. This resulted in 107 deaths, most of which were children. The solvent in the untested product was a chemical analog of antifreeze. The public outcry led to requirements for drugs to demonstrate safety prior to being released. Congress enacted the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or FDCA, in 1938, which marked the birth of the modern FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration. The new act, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, required that the manufacturer and not the FDA prove the safety of the drug before it could be marketed. It authorized the Food and Drug Administration to conduct manufacturer and distributor inspections and established penalties for using misleading labeling. Adequate directions for safe use and a list of all ingredients had to be included on the label, and product claims had to be accurate. So the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act established definitions for food, for drugs, for dietary supplements, devices, and cosmetics. It clearly defined what adulterated and misbranded drugs looked like. And so we have a few charts on the next page of this workbook, page 15. So we're going to go through the chart at the top. So we have definitions and terms. So we have the term food. The definition is items used for food or drink, the components in the food or drink, and chewing gum. The term drugs. Definition. Items recognized as drugs by the USP, the NF, again, USP is the United States Pharmacopoeia, and the NF is the National Formulary. So drugs are items recognized as drugs by the USP, the NF, or the official homeopathic pharmacopoeia, and their supplements used to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent disease. Another definition is items other than food intended to affect the structure or any function of the body. Dietary supplements is the term. Definition. So dietary supplements, product other than tobacco intended to supplement the diet that bears or contains one or more of the following ingredients. It could be a vitamin, a mineral, an herb, another botanical, or amino acid, and their concentrates and extracts. A dietary substance meant to supplement the diet by increasing the dietary intake, and which is not used as the conventional, this is another definition for dietary supplements. A dietary substance meant to supplement the diet by increasing the dietary intake, and which is not used as the conventional food or as the sole item of a meal or the diet. All right, the next term is devices. Definition: an instrument, an apparatus, a machine, an implement, a contrivance, an implant, in vitro reagent or similar that is recognized by the USP, intended to be used in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. Another definition for devices: an item intended to affect the structure or any function of the body, and which does not achieve its primary intended purposes through chemical action, and which is not dependent upon being metabolized. Cosmetics is the term. Definition: items that are intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, sprayed on, introduced into, or otherwise applied to the human body for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance, and the components of cosmetics except soap, which is not a cosmetic. All right, let's see. We have our chart on adulteration versus misbranding. We're on the middle to the bottom of page 15. So, as we know, adulteration of a drug would be a filthy, putrid, or decomposed medication. Adulteration would be that it was prepared or stored in unsanitary condition. Adulteration would mean contaminated. Adulteration of the drug would mean there was a lack of quality controls and purity testing. adulteration of the drug would be that the drug is recognized in official compendia, but its strength is different from the official standards, or the purity or quality is lower than the official standards. Adulteration of the drug where the drug is not recognized in the official compendia and its strength is different from that listed on the label, or the purity or quality is lower than that listed on the label. Here's some examples. You could have a vaccine which needs to be stored, must be stored in the freezer, but they have been storing it in the pharmacy refrigerator for the past week. That would be adulterated. You could have vials of injectable pain medication and they're found to contain glass shards. That would be an adulterated pain medication. You could have a manufacturer that does not perform adequate sterility tests before distributing their intravenous drugs. So the fact that they didn't perform the adequate tests before distribution would mean that it is an adulterated medication. Now we're on the misbranding or labeling column, page 15. So there is a lack of required information on the package and in the labeling, or the information cannot be read, it's illegible. Also, we have for misbranding and mislabeling, false or misleading information, imitating another drug, or promising false cures. Under misbranding and mislabeling, we could have special precautions needed to prevent decomposition are not actually listed. For example, in the labeling it didn't say to protect the medication from light. Also under misbranding and mislabeling would be improper packaging, such as lack of poison prevention packaging, or incomplete labeling of additives. Also under misbranding and mislabeling, the packaging could be found where it doesn't contain the proprietary or the branded or the established common name, right? So it's not on the packaging. Or the manufacturer or distributor is not listed and the business location is not listed in the labeling. Also for misbranding and mislabeling, if the ingredients differ from the standard of strength, quality, or purity as determined by the testing approved in the USP monograph, that would be an example of misbranding or mislabeling. So let's talk through a few more examples. We're at the bottom of page 15. So we could have an herbal product that claims that it cures cancer. That would be misbranding and mislabeling. You could have a product's labeling which does not include information about risk in pregnancy. You could have an oral contraceptive product that is dispensed without the required patient packaging insert. Those would all be examples of misbranding and mislabeling. So let's make a note here. A medication, it can actually be both adulterated and misbranded at the same time. So here's an example. If you have thyroid tablets and they're labeled as containing 60 milligrams, but they actually contain only 30 milligrams as determined by USP testing standards. So the strength is lower than the standard, which means that it's adulterated, and the product is being falsely labeled, which is misbranding. All right, so we're on page 16. And we're going to go through the Durham-Humphrey Amendment and the Kefauver-Harris Amendment. So the Durham-Humphrey Amendment of 1951, 1951. The Durham-Humphrey Amendment was sponsored by two pharmacist politicians. Their names were Congressman Carl Durham, he was a pharmacist from North Carolina, and Senator Hubert H. Humphrey. He was a pharmacist from South Dakota, who later became the 38th Vice President of the United States. So the Durham-Humphrey Amendment of 1951, this was the first time that a clear distinction was made between OTC, over-the-counter, and prescription RX drugs, and the labeling requirements for each were differentiated within the Durham-Humphrey Amendment of 1951. The amendment named 3 conditions that would make a drug available only by prescription. So again, this Durham-Humphrey Amendment of 1951, it named 3 conditions that would make a drug available as RX only. So the first condition is that the drug is habit forming. The second condition is that the drug is considered unsafe for use except under expert supervision due to toxicity concerns. And the third condition is that the drugs are limited to prescription use only under a manufacturer's new drug application. So another term for prescription drugs is legend drugs. So there's RX drugs, prescription drugs, legend drugs, they're all synonyms. The term legend drugs comes from the original legend required by the amendment to be placed on prescription drugs. The following statement: caution, federal law prohibits dispensing the medication without a prescription. This legend has since been simplified to state RX only under the FDA Modernization Act of 1997, which we haven't covered yet. That FDA Modernization Act will be talked about on page 20 through 21. We're only on page 16. So the next amendment that we're going to talk about, we're on middle of page 16, is the Kefauver-Harris Amendment of 1962, 1962. So in 1961, an Australian obstetrician reported an increase of severe malformations in children born to mothers using thalidomide, which was marketed as the first safe sleeping pill. And it was being used in pregnancy. It was also used for nausea during pregnancy. Although thalidomide was approved and was heavily marketed in Western Europe, the approval in the United States was blocked by a young pharmacologist, Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey, who had just started working at the FDA. She had concerns about the drug's safety, and then she refused to approve the medication in the U.S. Thalidomide is marketed in the United States today as Thalomid, along with related compounds, and it's being used for cancer and complications of Hansen's disease. With a risk evaluation mitigation strategy, REMS, to ensure safe use. In response to the events with thalidomide, Congress passed the Kefauver-Harris Amendment, also known as the Drug Efficacy Amendment, which implemented the following changes. So let's see. So the first change is that manufacturers must approve that a drug is both safe and effective before it can be FDA approved. Previously, the drugs only had to be proven safe before they could be marketed. Evidence of effectiveness must be based on adequate and well-controlled clinical studies conducted by qualified experts. After the drug is on the market, manufacturers must continue to report serious side effects to the FDA. Individuals were at the third implementation. That was the change. The third change here is that individuals must give their informed consent when they are study subjects of the clinical trial. This means that the individual has a right to know what to expect, including all of the risks, as well as possible benefits, and must agree to participate. The FDA had to conduct a retrospective evaluation on the effectiveness of drugs approved between 1938 and 1962, and this was called the DESI program, D-E-S-I, DESI. This is the Drug Efficacy Study Implementation Program. Then we have our fifth change, which implemented that the FDA was allowed to establish current good manufacturing practices, or CGMPs, for drug manufacturing and to perform inspections. The current good manufacturing practices assure the identity, the strength, the quality, and purity of drug products, and prevent errors by requiring the drug manufacturers to do these four things. They have to establish operating procedures and quality management systems. Then they have to obtain quality raw materials. Thirdly, they have to detect and investigate drug quality deviations. And fourth, they have to maintain reliable testing laboratories. And the last change is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, number 6. The FDA was given oversight to regulate the advertising of prescription drugs, and the Federal Trade Commission regulates advertising of OTC drugs. So we're on page 17 now, and we're going to take a break here.